Welcome to another descent into the quiet corridors of forgotten history. Before we begin, take a moment to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. These stories, rediscovered from the dust of archives and sealed boxes, travel far beyond the places where they first occurred, and tonight's case takes us back to the Missouri River Valley in 1909, to a secret that rested undisturbed for more than half a century. In the small town of Weston, Missouri, just a short distance upriver from Kansas City, life in the early 1900s moved with the slow rhythm of the river itself. Wooden storefronts lined the main street, the church bell marked each passing hour, and the nights were dark except for the flicker of kerosene lamps in narrow windows. Most of what remains in the county archives from that era concerns crop yields, livestock records, and the construction of the new railway spur. But in 1959, a maintenance worker repairing a leaking wall in the basement of the Weston courthouse stumbled upon a sealed tin trunk lodged behind the foundation bricks. Inside were bundles of letters wrapped in oilcloth, along with a small leather-bound notebook and several faded photographs. The trunk was labeled only AM and LF, 1909 to 1911. What those letters contained, now preserved in the Missouri Historical Repository, revealed one of the most unsettling partnerships ever documented in the region's history. The individuals behind those initials were Arthur Monroe and Lillian Frost, a reclusive embalmer and a widowed nurse whose shared fascination with the boundary between life and death would culminate in what local newspapers would later call the Pact of Stillness. Arthur Monroe arrived in Weston in the spring of 1907. Census ledgers list him as 36 years old, single, and employed as a mortuary assistant. He purchased a modest house on Vine Street with an attached carriage shed that he converted into his workshop. Records show that he applied for a license to operate as a funeral supplier, but it was never formally approved. Locals described him as courteous yet cold, the sort of man who tipped his hat but rarely met one's eyes. His presence might have passed unnoticed if not for his peculiar habits. Deliveries to his property often occurred late at night. Neighbors recalled the sound of wagon wheels over cobblestone long after midnight, and the sight of covered crates being carried into his workshop. When asked, Arthur explained that they contained imported embalming fluids and anatomical specimens used for study, perfectly plausible for someone in his trade, yet unsettling all the same. Lillian Frost arrived 2 years later in November 1909. She took a small room above the apothecary on Main Street, introducing herself as a nurse recently relocated from Omaha after the death of her husband, a physician. Mrs. Frost, as the townspeople called her, was in her early 30s, elegant in dress but subdued in manner, her black attire signaling prolonged mourning. She volunteered at the local infirmary, where she quickly gained a reputation for her composure with the dying. According to a surviving journal entry by one of the attending physicians, Mrs. Frost displays neither alarm nor pity in the face of death. She studies it as one might study a painting. The first recorded meeting between Monroe and Frost occurred on December 14, 1909, when Lillian brought a note to the mortuary regarding the funeral of a patient she had attended. Witnesses later recalled that the exchange was strangely intense for two strangers. One clerk remembered Arthur's hand trembling slightly as he accepted her message. By the following week, the pair were seen walking together on the cemetery path behind St. Peter's Church. Their relationship seemed professional at first, but the tone of their correspondence, those letters recovered half a century later, reveals something far deeper and infinitely darker. The earliest letter from Arthur to Lillian, dated December 23, 1909, begins, "Dearest Lillian, I cannot recall the last time a conversation lingered in my mind with such clarity. Your words regarding peace after the final breath have opened in me a longing I had long restrained. You see death as I do, not as a thief, but as an artist. Lillian's reply, found folded neatly in the same bundle, reads in part, Arthur, when I watched my husband's final hours, I came to understand that love need not perish with the pulse. There is beauty in stillness when one knows how to preserve it. You, more than anyone I've met, seem to grasp this truth. From that winter onward, the pair met frequently, though never openly. Monroe's workshop lights burned late into the night, and Lillian was often seen leaving the apothecary long after closing hours, her cloak drawn tight around her. Their letters, written in delicate script on cream stationery, form a chronological record of their descent. They discuss anatomy, preservation techniques, and what they called the permanence of affection. Arthur often referred to Lillian as my eternal bride, and she addressed him as the keeper of forms. By February of 1910, their correspondence took on a more disturbing tone. Arthur described the acquisition of unclaimed remains from Kansas City hospitals and his experimentation with various embalming compounds. In one letter, he boasts, "The gentleman from the infirmary now rests beneath glass. His repose is perfect. The tincture of arsenic and glycerin has preserved even the blush of the lips. When I look upon him, I feel not horror, but reverence." Lillian's responses show equal fascination. You write of the blush, the stillness, the repose, and I feel as though you speak of love itself. I would dearly wish to see your work, to understand what true permanence looks like. By spring, she no longer concealed her visits. The postmaster's logbook from March 1910 records several parcels addressed jointly to Mr. A. Monroe and Mrs. L. Frost, containing glass tubing, surgical tools, and quantities of carbolic acid, items that would later draw the suspicion of local authorities. The story might have faded into whispers were it not for the entries in Arthur's own journal, portions of which were preserved in the recovered notebook. His writing reveals a slow unraveling of moral boundaries. In an entry dated April 7, 1910, he notes, "She has seen the collection." Her eyes did not waver. I feared disgust, but she only smiled. She called them beautiful, my sleeping family. The collection he mentions appears to have been a series of preserved remains arranged within the cellar workshop. Witness descriptions later matched this with the discovery of several display cases and fixtures that had been removed during the investigation of 1911. Their obsession grew mutual, feeding on secrecy and isolation. In June, Lillian left her position at the infirmary without notice and moved into a small cottage owned by Arthur on the edge of town. The town register lists her as his assistant. That same month, a series of disappearances unsettled Weston, an itinerant preacher, a washerwoman, and a 12-year-old boy who'd been helping at the stables. None were ever found. The letters from this period turn cryptic. Arthur writes of our quiet guests and of the choir assembled in repose. Lillian describes dressing the preserved forms, arranging their hands so that they might seem in prayer. One particularly chilling passage, dated July 9, 1910, reads, "Tonight the river carries the world away, yet we remain unmoved, surrounded by those who will never leave us. When I look upon our creations, I feel no guilt, only envy. They have achieved the calm we seek by August. The couple performed what they called their vigil of union, a midnight ceremony described in detail in both their letters. It took place within Arthur's cellar workshop, lit only by oil lamps reflected through glass jars and mirrors. They exchanged rings fashioned from silver wire and spoke vows over what Arthur referred to as our dearest guest, the preserved body of a young woman reportedly obtained from Kansas City. The description matches that of Mary Dunleavy, a 24-year-old nurse who vanished while traveling by train from Independence to St. Joseph that same summer. Her disappearance was noted in regional papers, but never resolved. Following their private union, the tone of the letters shifted. Their fascination turned inward, focusing on their own mortality. Lillian wrote, "What we have given to others, we must in time bestow upon ourselves. I dream of the day when you prepare me as you have them, when I may rest under your hand, perfect and unchanging." Arthur responded, "And I, my beloved, shall lie beside you, our features fixed in devotion. Let no grave take us, no soil touch us. We shall be displayed as one eternal form, bound by art and love." This, historians believe, was the genesis of their Pact of Stillness, a mutual agreement to preserve each other in death. In early autumn, local rumors grew harder to ignore. The constant smell of chemicals drifting from the Monroe property, the sound of hammering at odd hours, and the sudden absence of several townsfolk led Sheriff Amos Green to conduct an informal inquiry. He visited the house on October 3, 1910, accompanied by a deputy. The official report, long believed lost but later recovered alongside the letters, states only that Mr. Monroe received us calmly, provided limited access to the premises, and nothing unlawful was observed at that time. Unbeknownst to the sheriff, Arthur had built a concealed room beneath the workshop floor. The letters describe it as the Chamber of Repose, accessible only through a trap door hidden under the coal stove. According to later excavation notes from 1960, this chamber measured roughly 8 feet square, with brick-lined walls and several recessed alcoves. By November, the tone of the couple's correspondence turned frantic. Lillian writes of being followed, of townspeople whispering her name in church. Arthur complains that his supplier in Kansas City had ceased responding. The final sequence of letters between them, dated between November 10th and November 19th, 1910, marked the closing of their story, and perhaps their lives. In Arthur's final letter, he writes, "The world grows unkind to us, my dearest. They would separate what was never meant to be parted. I have prepared the draft, quiet, painless, certain. When the hour strikes, I shall drink, and you shall follow. Then together, as we planned, I will preserve what remains of us." The chamber awaits Lillian's last reply, dated the following day, reads simply, "I shall not let the world take you from me. When I look upon your stillness, I will see my peace. Seal the door when it is done, and know that my spirit will not wander far." After November 1910, both Arthur Monroe and Lillian Frost vanished. Their home stood empty through the winter. By spring, it was purchased at auction by a merchant from St. Joseph who reported a pervasive odor and had the basement filled and sealed before moving in. The case was briefly reopened in 1911 following the discovery of several personal effects belonging to missing townspeople near the riverbank. But with no bodies and no clear evidence, the investigation faded into rumor. Over time, the story of Monroe and Frost became local folklore. The embalmer and his bride who vanished into their own art. It wasn't until that fateful discovery in 1959, when the courthouse trunk was unearthed, that their true voices resurfaced. The letters, authenticated by handwriting analysis and dated through postmarks and ink composition, left little doubt of their authorship. Yet the most shocking revelation came from a note folded into the back of Lillian's leather-bound notebook. Written in her hand, in faded brown ink, it read, "If you are reading this, know that we are not gone. Beneath the earth, our forms remain, unspoiled, awaiting rediscovery. To those who disturb our rest, do so gently. We wished only for permanence." Subsequent excavation beneath the old Monroe property in 1960 uncovered fragments of glass, metal fixtures, and what appeared to be traces of embalming fluid embedded in the soil. No bodies were ever recovered, leading some to speculate that the chamber may have collapsed or been removed long before the excavation. To this day, residents of Weston still tell stories of faint chemical scents that rise from the ground after heavy rain near Vine Street, and of a woman's voice heard humming softly at dusk by the river. Whether these tales stem from imagination or something far older, one can only guess. The story of Arthur Monroe and Lillian Frost, The Embalmer's Bride, 1909, remains one of the strangest and most haunting love stories ever recorded in Missouri's history. It is a tale of devotion, twisted by obsession, of two souls who sought eternity in the silence of preservation. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the soil, their vow endures still, unchanged, unbroken, waiting. If you found this story as unsettling and fascinating as we did, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share this with someone who appreciates true tales from the darker side of history. Until next time, sleep well and keep your lights low.